V'daber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, v'yikhu li truma. You should take from me truma. There's a question which is asked, which really it's not a valid question. You should say v'yitnu li truma. What's v'yikhu li truma? So it literally means that when a person tithes, person has grain, which is tevel. What do? You take from the tevel, from the untithed grain, you take a certain percentage, and you take it as truma, and that permits what's the balance that's left. Meaning, we have all this wealth that whether we took it out of Mitzrayim or was mentioned yesterday, the Debizas Hayam, the spoils of the sea, were given us specifically, which was endlessly more than the spoils of Egypt, specifically to build the Mishkan. The Yikhuli of those spoils, you should take truma. Yikhuli truma. You're tithing the material that you have, tithe on my behalf, truma. Therefore, it does say Yitnu. Yitnu is only once you've tithed it, you give me the truma. First, you have to tithe it. Now, the question is, let's speak about, give me the truma. Give me truma. What's v'yikhuli truma? Okay, so Rashi explains exactly why the Torah speaks about the stage before the actual truma was taken. What has to be one's intent when you take the truma? V'yikhuli truma li l'shmi. When you tithe it, you're tithing it for my sake. That's L'Shma. You say truma, a person, let's say, wants to eat grain, and because it's tevel, you're not permitted to eat it. So the Torah says, if you want to eat it, you have to take truma. There's no v'yikhu li truma. You don't have to take it li. You take truma, the truma is given to the Kohen. Tithing over the material, the wealth that we took at the sea. What do we do with that? With that tithing? The gold, the silver, the copper, whatever we're taking. That's the Mishkan. That is the domicile for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mostly Mishkan Shelchanti B'tocham. If you notice, we'll see in a moment, and the Medrash says it explicitly, how many materials were needed to build the Mishkan? 13. 13. What's 13? 13 is Echod. Gematria Echod is what? Is 13. Since the location is location for the Shekhinah, for the location of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, therefore that location has to reflect Hashem. The Maral says, if you want to depict Hashem or describe him in any way, you're not permitted. Why? Because whatever Hashem displays to us, that's only the way he relates to this world. Hashem is Rachum, he's Tanun, he's Erech HaPayim, he's Gibor, he's Norah, whatever he is. Those are attributes of how he relates to this world. But what is his essence? His essence, he's Ein Sof. God is infinite. So if you want to identify him, there's only one way to identify him. There's only one word. That word and no other word. Echad. That's the only way you're able to identify HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nothing exists outside of him. Which means, because he's infinite, everything is him. So therefore, the number of materials that were needed for the Mishkan were Yud Gimel, were 13. Because 13 is Echad, because that is the location for the Echad. So if that's the location for the Echad, when you tithe it, when you take that Truma, what do you have to have in mind? Yikhuli Truma. You should take it L'Shmi, specifically for me, because every bit of that location, every material, that's for my location to dwell in that location. That is my domicile. Those are the parameters of where I am. Therefore, it's v'yikhuli. It's not at the sub v'yitnu truma. You should give it to me. You're giving the truma l'shma. Where did it originate? There's a famous Gemara which we had above Mitzia. Reb Chia had a discussion with Reb Shimon, the son of Reb Yudah Nossi. And each one wanted to know who is greater. So Reb Shimon says that I could bring back Torah. If Torah was forgotten, I could bring it back through my dialogue. Reb Chia said, I did bring it back. Why? Because he says, when Torah was forgotten from Klal Yisrael, what did he do? He went and he planted flax, and he made nets out of the flax, and he caught deer, and he caught the deer, he slaughtered them, and he gave the meat. If you remember, he gave the meat to the poor, and the hides he made into what? Into cloth, into parchment, and on that cloth he wrote Chamish Chumshei Torah, and he took 5 children, he taught them Chamish Chumshei Torah. Then he wrote Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, and taught each one another Seder, another order of the Mishnah, and said, each of you teach the other. And through them, Torah exists in Klal Yisrael. That's what Chia said. So Maharsha asks, why do you have to plant flax to make nets and catch the deer and slaughter the deer and make his cloth? You go to the market where they sell cloth that meet all the prerequisites of what qualifies for tefillin and Torah mezuzah. Buy the cloth on the market. So the Maharsha says, Reb Chia understood that everything is determined. The success of whatever you do is determined what you invest in that. Since when he planted the flax, it was for the sake of ultimately catching these deer to do the mitzvah. So even the nets were a different net. The deer that were caught were l'shem mitzvah. The deer that was slaughtered was l'shem mitzvah. The cloth that was made l'shem mitzvah. Every aspect of what he did, that Torah from stage, the infinitesimal stage till it's fully being actualized, was l'shem mitzvah. As a result of that, that's the reason why I was able to maintain Torah and Klal Yisrael. That's how the Maharsha explains Reb Chia. That's why he started with the planting of the flax. If the Torah would say V'yitnu li truma, the truma you have, give to me. What is give to me? The truma is already now, but you understand you're late in the game. The truma is already here. It's v'yichud li truma. When you create the truma and you tithe it, the tithing itself should be for my sake. That's from the inception of the truma. It's for what? It's for Hashem. As a result of that, the echad, where does the echad start? The echad starts from the infinitesimal level, from the very infinitesimal pre-truma. Now I'm creating the truma from there. It's interesting. Truma is almost like a concept of yesh mi'ayin. You have tevel. Torah says when you take truma, now the remainder remains chulin, remains permitted. Where did truma come from? When you consecrate an animal, you take an ordinary animal, you say it should be an ola shlomim, whatever it is. Why does it become that? Because you said it should be that. When you tithe truma, is it somehow the Torah says when you tithe for truma, it becomes truma. It's not kedushas haper. It's not kedushas haper. It's not because there's such a thing. You designated this for ola. You designated this for truma. It's not the same. The reason why when you take an animal, you designate it for ola, that means it's designated for a burnt offering. You designate it for a shlomim. Here, truma is coming out of nowhere. Where's truma coming from? It's almost like a yesh mi'ayin. The truma that we're using over here for the Mishkan reflects yesh mi'ayin. Because this material is used for what? It's going to be used for what? For the location, mostly Migdash or Shechanti B'Socham. Therefore, it's Yud Gimel. It's 13, Echod, and therefore it's V'yichuli. From the very inception, you have to take the truma. V'yichuli truma. L'shmi. What's truma? Rashi says, Hafrosha yafishli mimodim dedava. They should tithe from their money an adava, a gift. There's a medrash. The medrash says something interesting. We find that when Moshe Rabbeinu instructed Klal Yisrael to build the Mishkan, it says, Kashediber Hashem el Moshe. Kashediber Hashem el Moshe. Everything is Kashediber Hashem el Moshe, as Hashem had spoken to Moshe. So the Medrash says, what is it an analogous to? A king asked an architect and to design a palace, and he designs the palace, and it has multiple components. The palace, there's the floor, the ceiling, the pillars, whatever it is, the furniture. On every component of that palace, it says, for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of Hashem. For the sake of the king, for the sake of the king. What is that? What does that demonstrate? The person who built it, everything he was committed to the king. Kasher Hashem Moshe, every detail to the smallest nuance of the Mishkan was Kasher Hashem Moshe. That means Moshe did it L'Shma the way he instructed them. Every detail was for the sake of Hashem. There was nothing was not for the sake of Hashem. As Hashem had prescribed, that's how it was built. You know, it's interesting. There's no way to understand what Echad is. But Hashem understands what Echad is because Hashem is Echad. Hashem is that. The Mishkan is Kasher Divrei Hashem Moshe. Because only he could identify what's necessary to accommodate his presence. Therefore, it's Kasher Divrei Hashem Moshe when it comes to the Mishkan. Because since its function is to accommodate the Echad, the only one who knows what Echad is only Hashem himself. Therefore, he tells you exactly how to do it. V'yikhuli truma. It has to be from the very inception taken from me for the Echad. And everything's for the Echad. And the number of 13 materials also for the Echad. I was just thinking while I'm talking, when we took the material, we borrowed the material, the gold, the silver from the Egyptians. How do we take it? We deceived them. Even though, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, we had a right to it, because they enslaved innocent people, and they owed us endless wages, which they never gave us. That was the whole story with Alexander the Great, with the world court, and he had a balance to be paid. But still, how did it come about? Through deception. And it came through deception. It came through deception. The material that was used for the Mishkan, how did that come about? It wasn't deception. The Gemara tells us in Bab Mitzvah, Elul Mitzias, which we studied a while ago. Ernie once studied Makis, we studied Elul Mitzias at one time. And we studied the concept of you find a lost article, the halacha is there's a chiyuv, there's an obligation to return it to the rightful owner. It's called Hashavas Aveda. What about if the article falls into Zuto Shal Yam? As the ocean is coming in, it falls there, and the ocean draws it out into the ocean or into a river. The halacha is Zuto Shal Yam. Even if the man screams, I don't despair, it's hefker. It's ownerless. Why? And why is Yush Koneh? If a person despairs, the finder has a right to keep it. If he finds it after the owner despaired. Because the Torah says, when do you have an obligation to return it to the owner? It says, Asher avuda mimenu. If it's lost from the one who lost it, then it's what? Then you have to return. What about it's avud menu mikol adam? It fell into a location. It's not only lost from the owner, it fell into a location. It's lost from all mankind. Fell into the ocean. That means it's not accessible to anyone. When a person loses something, he doesn't know where it is, but somebody else could come upon it. When it falls into the ocean, nobody could come upon it. It becomes ownerless. It comes out very interesting. The material that we used for the Mishkan was the Bizas Ayam. Yesterday I said the reason why Hashem gave him so much was because if the Jews would hesitate for a moment when Hashem would say, it would create a kitrug. Remember, I said it would create a tremendous prosecution on Klal Yisrael. So still no. The Mishkan has to be built from material that is nothing, which is not 100% above board. There's no trace of what? The signet of God is truth. If there's any degree of compromise in truth, it becomes a problem. How did we take the gold and silver from the Egyptians? It was through deception. We deceived them. We said we're borrowing and we didn't return it. That Bizas Hayam, the ocean came down, the chariots were covered with gold, silver, and diamonds. When it went there, it's hefker. So when we're building the Mishkan, for what are we building Mishkan? Something that's ownerless, nobody could have a claim, that they have a claim to that whatsoever. As a result of that, this is pure. This is MS on the absolute level. As a result of that, only from the Bizas Hayam were we able to build the Mishkan, and not from the material, from the wealth that they took out of Egypt, for that reason. There's a Chazal, many years ago, there was a certain Sefer. Today, people don't learn it. It's called the Chanukah Sabayis on Chumash. Small little sefer, Chanukah Sabayis. It was written by the Rebbe Reb Heschel. Who was the Rebbe Reb Heschel? The Rebbe Reb Heschel was the Rebbe of the Shach and the Taz. And we have his Navalei on Chumash. And over there he cites a midrash that the Kochi Kadoshim, what was the location of the Oron? The location of the Oron was in the portion of Binyamin. Binyamin. So the question is why? And the Gemara asked the question why. Why was Binyamin Zoche? Why did he merit that the Oron, that he should be the domicile of the Shechina? The Oron was exactly in his location. He's referred to as Ushmizichnei Shel Shechina. He's the host of the Shechina. Binyamin was the host of the Shechina. So the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Zvachim that because he was, and Megillah, because he was Chofim of Kol Yom. It's something he wanted more than all the other Shvatim. He was Chofim. He pined for it. There's another medrash. He brings the Chanukah Torah, cites a medrash that we find that when Yaakov confronted Esav, and eventually there wasn't this confrontation, he introduced his family. Since his first, Bill and Zilpah came with her children. And what does it say? And they bowed to Esav. And then Leah came with her children. They bowed to Esav. And then Rachel came with Yosef, and they bowed to Esav. The only one who didn't bow to Esav was Binyamin. Why? Because Rachel was pregnant with Binyamin at the time. Binyamin wasn't born yet. So because Binyamin was the only Shevet did not bow to this spiritual monster, Esav, therefore that's the reason why the Shechina, he was the host of the Shechina. I mean, if he would have bowed, I mean, it's inappropriate. I mean, his location, which is associated, that submitted to evil, bowed to evil, it's inappropriate. So any of the other Shvatim, they all bowed, they had relevance, they submitted to evil. They acknowledged it, even though they didn't value it, it doesn't make a difference. Binyamin never bowed. So because Binyamin never bowed, that's the reason why he merited to be Ushmizichnei Shel Shechina. He merited to be the host of the Shechina for that reason. The Orah was in his portion. It's the same concept. The spores of the sea, there's no trace of anything which is lacking in integrity. It's Zuta Shalyam, it's Avud Men Kolodom. There was no deception. If we would have used the material from Egypt, it's inappropriate. You see, God, look at the material use. It's like, person buys fenced property. There's halacha. If a person steals a pair of tefillin and wears them, what is it? In mitzvah bab aveira. Mitzvah bab aveira. What about after the thief steals it? The owner despairs and he sells it to a third party. That third party, is he permitted to wear those tefillin? Is it still a mitzvah bab aveira? So the Ramos says in Hilchos Tefillin, you shouldn't wear those tefillin. That since those tefillin, although monetarily speaking, those tefillin, you're permitted to take possession because there's a yush, because the owner despaired and you bought it from the thief after the despair. It's called yush and shinu v'shus. Nevertheless, you shouldn't wear those tefillin. Why? Because they're tainted. Because since the origin of those tefillin come from a theft, it's inappropriate. Those tefillin should be used. Even though if you have no other pair of tefillin, you could wear them. But if you have any choice not to wear, you should not wear those tefillin. Because they're tainted. Because the origin is thievery. But luckily, monetarily, you're permitted to take it. It's after Yush. They owed it to us, but how did it come about? The spoils of Egypt, what we took from the Egyptians, it came through deception. Therefore, the Mishkan came from Bizas Hayam, it came from the spoils of the sea. There was no deception there. It was ownerless wealth that they took. Therefore, same thing, v'yikhuli tshuva. From the very inception, you have to take it from me. Yikhuli tshuva me'ez kol ish asher yitvenu libo. Tichos shumasi. Now, what does it say? Kol ish asher yitvenu libo. The person who gives out of the generosity of his heart. Say, we won't need a mishkan. What happens if people feel they're compelled to give it? It's compulsory to give it. The halacha machzeh shekel. Every year, Jews in Adar, we have machzeh shekel to bring the new korbanos. The new korbanos and Nisa were bought from the new machzeh shekel. That was an obligation, a Torah obligation. Every Jew from the age of 20 and above, every male had to give machzeh shekel, right? You can't give more or less than the machzeh shekel. Over here, it's asher yidvenu libo. The only donation that qualified to be received, you had to give it as a result of generosity of your heart. Why? What is the Mishkan all about? It's our chance to be reinstated. Hashem is begging us. You must give the material. That's a prerequisite. A prerequisite. That firstly, that you're doing the Shema. What's the ultimate level of Shema? We had in Silsa Shorim, a person does a mitzvah because he wants to share in the world to come. It's L'Shma, no question. It's L'Shma. Why? Because Hashem created the world. Only it should be the prosdor for the tripling. This is the setting where we earn. So you do it for the sake of sharing the world to come. He says that's not the ultimate L'Shma. The ultimate level of Shema is that when you do it, you feel privileged that you have the opportunity to serve Hashem. That's called years of Romamus. That's as a result of what? Of reverence. You feel privileged. It's not because I'm a beneficiary, I receive something. That there's you. It's selflessly you do for him. You feel privileged that you have the opportunity to do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the ultimate. The yichli truma, asher yidvenu libo. Take it, tithe it for me, but only one gives out of generosity of his heart. There's no obligation. It's not compulsory. The moment it's compulsory, why are you doing it? The moment the word is, I had no choice. Is that the basis to build the Mishkan? Here you have the ultimate life's opportunity. And the reason why you're doing it is because I had no choice. Therefore, the moment we speak about obligation, it has no relevance to the building in the Mishkan. Therefore, it's asher yidvenu libo. That component, that characteristic has to be there. It's only those who give as a result of the generosity of their hearts that it qualify for the material to be given for the Mishkan. Yidvenu libo, loshin nidava, vu loshin rotzon tov. Rotzon tov, not rotzon. Rotzon tov. It's not, I consent. It's with a positive aspect of consent. I want to consent. I'll give you an example. Lahavdil. Person, wanted to go to the closing game. Alan, this is your subject matter, the World Series. And you couldn't get tickets. You figure you go to the stadium, you'll be able to buy tickets. And they're selling tickets at the stadium to be able to get in for the World Series to get those seats. 100 times the value of the original ticket. But if you want to go, be there. And this person never missed the World Series in his life, and he's 85 years old. And that means this man, he lives the World Series to be there. And he's a man who could afford, and he pays a fortune. People say, are you out of your mind? You pay so much for the tickets to go to the World Series. He says, if you understand what the World Series is, if I have to give 10 times as much, I pay for those tickets. You don't know what it means to be there. This is the ultimate privilege to witness the World Series game. You understand? Lahavdil. Lahavdil elef havdolos. If you understand what it means to serve Hashem, who God is, and you're his chosen, and you were created specific for that. Vichulik, yidvenu. There's not a trace of being forced, coercion. Yidvenu. Hu loshin rotzon tov. It's not only I consent, it's rotzon tov. I'm giving with a willingness. I want to do this. Equal is trumasi. Omru Rabbeinu Shaldish Trumas Amuris Kant. The word truma is mentioned 3 times. Achas trumas beka lagugolas. Shenasu men adonim k'moshim fursh ben l'pkudei. One is the beka. There was a machzor shekel that every Jew gave to make the sockets, which the vertical beam stood on. Those were the Adonim. Achas Trumas HaMizbeach, Beka Lagugoles, Lakubas, Liknos Ben Korban Sibor. The other Master Shekel was to purchase the communal offerings. Achas Trumas HaMishkan. And the third was the tithing for the Mishkan. Nidvas Kolech Ve'echod. Now, he makes the point. Yud Gimel Dvorim, Hamurim Binyan. There are 13 materials that were needed. I mentioned number 13, which Gematria Echod is Gematria 13. Hamurim Binyan, Kulam Hilchul Melechas Mishkan. They were needed for the Melechas, for the development of the Mishkan, or the big day Kuna, Shetidaktik Behem, or for the vestments. A Kohen without vestments is not qualified to officiate. So therefore, the material that was needed even for the big day Kuna, for the priestly vestments, that's considered part of the building of the Mishkan. Because without a Kohen, you can't serve Hashem. You have to bring the Korban. And the only one's qualified to bring the Korban is the Kohen, and the Kohen is only qualified if he's wearing the vestments. And this is the truma that you should take from them. Meaning, after you tithe it, li, zov chesed nechoshes, gold, silver, and copper. Rashi, zov chesed nechoshes, kulam bo bin dova. These materials were given as not as obligatory. It was nadova. It was donated. Ishish mashen nodvu libo. Except the silver that came, that was, you had to give, everybody had to give an equal amount, which is the machzeh shekel. The additional silver that was given, they used for klishoris, for the ministry vessels. Now there's a Ramchal. The Ramchal writes that you have the species of sheep, you have the species of goats, you have the species of oxen, cattle. That of that species, Hashem says that those three species qualify as a korban. As a result of that, when we use those species for korban, those species is considered an elevated species. Even the chulin, even the ordinary, the non-consecrated animal, sheep or goat or ox or cow, is considered an elevated species. Why? Because it's of that species we bring korbanos. So he says, in terms of the wardrobe of a Jew, part of the wardrobe of a Jew is a four-cornered garment. And the Torah says that if a Jew has a four-cornered garment, you have to put tzitzis on the four corners and tchelis. And each one, that mitzvah has a certain level of representation. Tired mitzvahs, it reflects the kisei hakavod, as the Gemara says in Menachos. So as a result of that, the wardrobe of the Jew has within it the mitzvah of tzitzis. Because one of the garments is four-cornered. That elevates the whole wardrobe of the Jew. It's not just ordinary. It's not just to cover your nakedness. It has an aspect of kedusha to it. Your wardrobe identifies with Hashem. That's what it is. It's the wardrobe of royalty. That's our wardrobe. So anything, let's say we talk about the palm tree, the lulav. The Gemara says that there are 10 species of palm trees. They don't all qualify to be the lulav. Only a specific palm tree qualifies to be a lulav. So that species that qualifies, it's an elevated species, because of that species, God created that species to do the mitzvah. A kosher species, the hide of a kosher species qualifies for Torah, tefillin, and mezuzah. Any other species, the hide doesn't qualify for it. To make parchment with the leather for the tefillin, doesn't. Automatically, it's elevated. V'yichud li truma. These materials, gold, silver, and copper, that are needed to create the domicile for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to dwell in that location. Automatically, gold is special. Why is it special? Because it sells for $2,000 an ounce on the open market. It's special because it was needed for the Mishkan. Silver is special because it was needed for the Mishkan. And copper, every one of these materials, because together, in combination, that was the location for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. I'd mentioned, just look at the next post, was Cheles Vargomon, V'Solash Shani V'Sheish V'Izim. Cheles, there's a question what to call it. Cheles is, it comes from a special species called chalozon. It's the blood of a chalozon. Rashi says it's green. And Rashi says in the Gemara also. Cheles semer tzavua bedam chalozon, wool that was dyed with the blood of this chalozon, utzvo yorok, and the color is green. Others learn it's blue. Vargoma semer tzavua min tseva shishmo argoma. Argoma is supposed to be purple. The sheishu pishton, the izim, nutzishel izim kachtig oglis maazio. It means the hair, goat's hair, below izim atzmon, not the goats themselves. Now, the oros elim odomim, the hides of rams dyed red, vorst choshevat seishitim modomim, tzevuos hoyu. They were ram's hides that were dyed red. Lachi budan. After they were tanned and made into hides, they were dyed red. Tchoshim and chayiv l'hois el l'sho. It's a type of species that became extinct that only presented itself for that moment. Varbi gavonohoyo. It was a multicolored hide species. Kach mechtargem sas godno. Shesosum spire begavonim shelo. It prides itself in its like a peacock, prides itself in its feathers. This animal prides itself in its various colors, multicolored hide. Let's stop for a moment. The Medrash says we have Zov, Kesef, and Choshes. Then we have Oros, Elim, and Domim. Zov corresponds to Bavel, to the Babylonian exile, the Babylonians. Of course, we find that Daniel, when he had the dream, he saw a golden head represents Bavel. Kesef is what is Porus Modai. What do we find? Because we find that Haman, when he wanted to seal the fate of the Jews, he gave 10,000 talents of silver, of bullion, to seal the fate of the Jews, to bring about the decree, Lahashma Labid. Nechoshes is Yovan. Yovan, the Greeks. And Oros Elim Modomim, the red hides, the hides of the rams that were colored red, that's Edom. Edom is red. So there's a representation in the Mishkan of the four exiles. We're talking about this is the antithesis of Kedusha. These are the ones who are opposed to Kedusha, yet they have a representation in the Mishkan. Interesting. The Gemara tells us in Yuma that the Anshe Knesset at Dolo, at the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, they were mispalel, they prayed to be able to destroy the Yitzhar Shel Avodah Zarah, the evil inclination of Avodah Zarah. It says they fasted 100 fasts, and then they prayed, and all of a sudden, they saw a lion made of fire coming out of the Kodesh Kadoshim. They captured it, they put it into a lead cylinder, and they destroyed it. And after that, the drive, it says, at one time, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, the drive for idolatry was more consuming than the sexual drive. It was all consuming. And because it ravaged the Bais Rishon, the Jews during that first temple period, they were attracted and they couldn't separate themselves from idolatry. Therefore, they felt they have to destroy it for that reason. I mean, we're talking about the line of Avodah Zarah that came out of Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies. It's the location of the Shekhinah. How's it possible? Say it comes out of somewhere else. So we see here that in terms of the balance between good and evil, we have equal footing. Because if we start there and they start elsewhere, then it's not an equal balance. They have to be represented in the location we're represented. Now we start. We start from the equal location, good and evil. Now who has the upper hand? As a result of that, the fiery line which represented Avodah Zarah, which is the antithesis, the denial of Hashem's presence, comes out of the Kodesh Kadoshim. Therefore, when we build a Mishkan, you have to have a representation of what? Zov, Bavel, Kesef is Parsa Modai, Nachosh is Yovon, and Oris Madomim is what? That is Edom, for that reason. I was just thinking while I'm speaking that it's very interesting. What represents Edom? Oros Elim Odomim. The ram's hide that are colored red. If not for the Akedah, we wouldn't survive the prosecution of Satan against us. As a result of the Akedah, when we blow the shofar, that silences the kitrug, the prosecution of Satan. That horn is the horn of what? That's a ram's horn. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, when was that ram created for the Akedah? Bein HaShmoshes, at the twilight period, right before Shabbos again, Hashem created that ram. The ram, that representation of that ram for the Akedah, which ultimately will silence evil, was created Bein HaShmoshes. So the Akedah is the Elim, is the Ayil. Now in the Mishkan, what represented? How was Edom represented? Oros Elim Odomim, also the ram. Edom is the ram. The Sitra Achra, the Samach Mem, the evil that is the antithesis of Kedusha. Is who is that? That's Edom. The Malach who fought Yaakov wanted to kill Yaakov when they battled all night. That was the Sitra Achra. That was the archangel of Edom. So that's Elim, Oros Elim Odomim. It's the ram. There's the ram versus the ram. I'm just pointing it out right now. First time I noticed it. It's the Elim Modomim red, because that's Edom. And the other Elim was the Akedah, the other Ayil. Mishkan was a microcosm of existence. That's what it was. And that's the reason why all Hilchos Shabbos are learned from the building of the Mishkan. All the creative activity that was needed for the Mishkan, those are the creative activities were not permitted on Shabbos, because the Torah juxtaposes the prohibition of Shabbos to the building of the Mishkan. And the Medrash says that we find that the Mishkan was a microcosm of existence. Where do we find the representation of Yikova Amayim? Let the waters gather. That was the kior, the laver. Where do we find heaven? It says, Nota Shamayim Kayuriya, quotes Psukim. David says, he spread heaven like the Uriah, like the tapestry of the Mishkan, the Uriahs in the Mishkan. So it's a microcosm. When Hashem created this world, what was the original intent? To be with the Malachim or to be with the human being? To be with the human being. It's only because Adam failed, therefore he separated. Sinai was the first time Hashem came back to the terrestrial level. We failed with the Egel, but Hashem says, no, I will still have a relationship on the terrestrial level through the Mishkan. So the Mishkan is the equivalent of the creation of the world. That's what it is. If we wouldn't have been choti with the Chet Egel, we would have been the Mishkan. That's the direct, because that was the intent of creation. But now that we're no longer qualified because we became tainted with the Egel, so what is the location? It's the terrestrial, it's the Mishkan. But the Mishkan, in every aspect of of what it is, corresponds to every one day of creation. So in creation, there's good and evil. The four exiles, the first pasuk in the Torah, second pasuk. All these are representation of the four exiles. Bavel, Porus, Modai, Yovon, and Edom. Every one of them. So it's really very good. Just as originally there's a representation in creation of the four exiles the Mishkan, which is a microcosm of creation, has to have that same level of representation. Again, for the same reason, for the balance.
Rabbi, a question I had was,